Thank you very much. And I'm afraid that I'm the only non-European speaker in this conference, so I want to say something from the viewpoint of the outside of the Europe, but happening in the Europe. Japan and other Asian countries likewise enjoy unique history and tradition that have evolved over thousands of years. Its own self-standing civilization and its rich in variety culture that have been nurtured throughout ages. We take pride in having preserved those up until nowadays, and we are also proud to keep fostering and developing our culture further. At the same time, I think the majority of us, Asian people, are well aware of the fact that the two concepts or systems, namely capitalism and democracy, that have originated and steadily progressed since 19th century until present days here in Europe, have contributed a great deal to the development of civil society and market economy in many Asian countries, including Japan. One of the topics I'd like to bring forth today is how come those concepts of capitalism and democracy that Europe has been an ideological cradle and pioneering leader of may appear, at least as viewed by Japan and some other Asian countries, to have somewhat gone astray into a blind alley. I also have an impression that Europe, and more specifically the European Union, which lies at the heart of the country's politics, economy, and society, have so far failed, if I could say, to find the right remedy for this problem. To make a long story short, and if assuming a bigger picture here, I dare to say this, this blind alley phenomenon had been brought about by the fast-paced economic globalization on a worldwide scale. Alongside with the IT revolution, the surge globalization in the second half of the 20th century has come up as an essential economic and social attribute of capitalistic system. And through a massive acceleration of flow of information, both in terms of the quantity and quality, contributed substantially to enlarging the wealth and welfare of the whole international community. On the other hand, as a side effect of the globalization, the Gini coefficient, that is to say a disparity of wealth, have remarkably increased, rearing its ugly head not only to the developed countries but to the medium developed and developing ones alike, thus causing social destabilization therein. The generation of our parents or grandparents share the hope and vision that their children or grandchildren would live more materially abundant and happy life than themselves. This is how the sense of belonging to the nation society was nurtured. But since the beginning of the 21st century, many people have become anxious. The living standard of their children would drop below the level of their own generation. As a result, many citizens have started to feel marginalized, or if you like, cast out from the society, overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness. What is actually going on with Europe right now? I'm of opinion that the middle class, which should, according to the very postulate on the existence of democratic capitalism, constitute a backbone of a society, has been, due to the globalization, causing income divide and similar things, marginalized and weakened. This leads to civil societies becoming more and more unstable in many European countries. It feels very worrying that then to see such a phenomenon to gradually arise here in Europe, where democracy and capitalism established themselves for the first time ever in the world history, putting down deep roots in each and every society over many years, hence enjoying the world's longest tradition and knowledge. In several European countries, the socio-democratic politicians have set themselves to seek reintegration of the middle class, although such attempts don't seem to have brought successful results so far. Quite on the contrary, these countries had the tides of globalization backfire at them in the form of an economic downturn, which as a consequence translated itself to a downturn of support and trust of people to the political leadership. Don't get me wrong, I'm not an anti-globalist myself. Fruits of prosperity delivered by globalization are sweet and attractive. The globalization trends in the international community constitute a major historical force, so we can neither stop them nor reverse them. But in addition, and in this very context, I can't help but feel that as opposed to basic ethic resting upon an idea of hard work, the notion people were inspired by while fostering democracy and capitalism, which were born here in Europe. Now in the 21st century, with globalization pushing ahead, the greed seems to have become the most important part of the system of values within the international society. So what is happening in the world of politics in Europe against the background of such course of event after all? If I was to explain it by using a journalistic keyword, I would describe it as an upsurge in populism, anti-intellectualism, chauvinism, and the right-wing conservatism. As a diplomat working in Europe, I'm in no position to criticize this situation. I cannot but suggest that the populism and the other movements in the European politics are a reflection of screaming voices of those European citizens who have been marginalized and gradually cast out from a society. I also think that the recent referendum in June this year on continuance of the British membership in the EU, which resulted the out vote and would lead to a so-called Brexit, is in a way just an example, one example of such screaming voice of a silent majority of the UK citizens. The fact that Europe is faced with such political, social, and historical challenges indeed raise two concerns in my mind. First, I'm afraid that the EU, or Europe, comprised of as much as 28 countries might become, under the weight of handling such difficult armed problems, more inward-looking, failing to live up to its important leadership within the international community. Second, when taking into account that such thing can happen here in Europe, which is a pioneer of democracy and capitalism, as I said, I fear we may witness the acceleration of similar negative trends in the entire international community in the future. From the short-term perspective and on an external level, the EU seems to have serious problems in its relation with the East and with the South. By the East, I mean the complicated issues pertaining to the relation with Russia, then with the Ukraine, and so on. By the South, I'm referring to a worrying situation related to the immigration, refugees, terrorism, etc. In addition, the EU also has to cope with a wide range of internal problems like Brexit, economic agriculture, and subsidy policies, just to name a few. Political leadership, both of the European Commission and the member states, is tackling resolutely this kind of internal and external problems, and I have to say I highly respect the political leadership of the European Union. Furthermore, I do believe that in handling those sort of problems the EU is faced with, it is not just a question of how to address them, but also a discussion on why these problems emerge and under what political and social circumstances might become necessary. I think plenty of you know the name Count Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi, just as Mr. Unger of the European Academy mentioned. He called for and was a major advocate of the pan-European movement in the beginning of the 21st century, so he can be considered as a forerunner of the European integration. However, I guess some of you may not know that Kalergi, in fact, was born in Tokyo to a Japanese mother and a father who was an Austro-Hungarian diplomatic then. Nearly 100 years has passed since Kalergi's era. The EU has become a giant. Economics as well as social integration has progressed steadily. I believe that with the EU society assuming such a colossal shape, it has become necessary for all the stakeholders to get back to the basic, to deliberate on ideas and politics aimed at linking together the EU citizen again. Last of all, the idea contained in this speech are purely my own, and they don't have to necessarily correspond to any official stance of the government of Japan, whatever. Thank you very much.